and welcome to Empires of Aether. In this video, we'll be covering the patch notes, so to speak, for April of 2022, sort of the halfway point of our season, where we've got Blue Shadow and Goofy sitting atop the standings, utilizing a very aggro approach to the game, where we see lightning, fire, air, and glacier really just dominating the elemental landscape of our games thus far. And so some of these new implementations into the game are sort of a way to kind of slow the pace of the game down and maybe broaden what abilities are deemed attractive in certain situations. And so here we go. Let's dive into, of course, the most broken element in the game for the season, despite being underused, water. Water's getting a couple changes here. And of course, we are kicking it off with the nerf. Finally, we are here. The nerf of water, the most broken and dominant element of this game, really the entire time we've been working on this game. Water has been just an absolute dominant force, and yet newer players coming in haven't really seen it as attractive, and yet this last week, several casual games have shown water it's a problem. It gets banned a lot of the time. It's dominating the banning phase, and when it gets played, it just kind of feels rough to play against, because if they get any sort of building material supplement injected into their game, whether it's a weather event or an advantage card or just a negative play by another player, then water is just unstoppable. They're one of the few elements that can play a war on two fronts confidently because they're pumping out so many troops. And so one of the things that I did is I took away their lake bonus in terms of food. I'm not going to integrate this Merpeople as a tier 1 ability just yet. I'm going to keep it as a passive. We're going to see what this taking away of the water buff on lakes does for them right now. But on top of that, I nerfed both their weather ability and their call in the navy ability, moving it from 3 soldiers to 2 soldiers per coastal tile. And now the river ability, you have to convert 2 of your owned or neutral tiles, as opposed to just 1, into a river tile and extend it only 1 tile in any direction. Because what this ability was being used for was not only to bolster their relevance in terms of mobility on the board and get them further to completing the quest, but it was also used to just absolutely shatter a lot of different elements' economies. And so by only converting 1 potentially opposing tile into a river, this is going to hinder that, possibility for this river ability being able to use so aggressively. You still have the ability to attack from river tiles in tier 3 using Marduk's Cry, which allows you to extend the river with each successful attack. So I think that the river ability was best used as a PvE, where you're just trying to control the temple and get all the river tiles on your board just to get to your quest, and you can utilize your healthy amount of food in order to defend it. So I think now it is going to be mostly used for that, but still has the potential relevance to engage in combat when you're in that late tier 2, early tier 3 phase. On top of that, we added a new tier 3 ability to give the coastal strategy for water a little more relevance, which gives them a teleport feature across the board. I think this is going to make water one of those threats where they can truly eliminate an opponent on the opposite corner from them. And it also gives them the potential to obtain that coastal tile on a coastline that isn't on their starting corner. So watch out for that in the late game. They're going to be significantly weaker in terms of the coastal strategy in the early game, but in the late game, they could snag that win condition at any given time. We also have eliminated a few abilities that really disrupt the winning strategies of other elements. Boss tiles are so intrinsic to the game now that I don't like many abilities to disrupt that. And so Terraforming is one of the very first tier 3 cards I made in the game, on one of the very first elements made, and it was going to disrupt all the landmark and boss tiles on that central line. Kind of want to remove that. And so now Terraforming just very, very plainly is going to just convert 3 tiles you own to mountain tiles. What I'm also considering is adding that mobility passive back into it to where you can move through consecutive mountain tiles as the Earth Nation. I'm holding off on it now because Earth has absolutely been dominant when it has been playing. Plate Tectonics is an incredibly aggressive ability, and you still have that spare rooms 50-50 resource goal that you can go for in the late game if Plate Tectonics doesn't work out for you in the early game. So I'm not going to give that mobility passive to Earth because, one, I just feel like it doesn't make sense for, what Earth is all about, maintaining your position. I don't think it should be them creeping across the board in one fell swoop. Then we get to Magma. Magma was absolutely dominant before this last round of players came through. In fact, when we did our invitational, Magma was so superior. It did have a little bit of a failing performance in the tournament, in the final. And so now it's just really kind of fallen by the wayside since the game has really picked up the pace, right? You have aggro nations killing bosses on turn 1 sometimes, and then people dying turn 2 and turn 3 consistently due to blunders. Yes, blunders, but the fact that lightning and air and fire can do it consistently is why we need some of these more turtley nations to gain a little more relevance. And so one of these abilities is just really fun, and I want to see more of these sort of interactions being implemented in the game soon. But Magma's getting a whole new set of abilities. We're also kind of clarifying how Pompeii, more like Pompeii, is going to be utilized, giving it definitely a buff here to where you don't necessarily have to take that volcano from nothing ability. So Pompeii is definitely getting a buff where it has a scaling price. Let me move my face out of the way there for a second. It has a scaling price based on how many volcanoes you already own. So we've got different tier 1s available, a couple tier 2s available, and this one right here, Pyroclastic Vents, is specifically a Magma versus Fire counter. Yes, it is good. It's a good ability, allowing Magma a little more mobility to maintain the ground that they are taking, but it is specifically a Magma versus Fire counter. It could be absolutely broken. All I have to do is take out that no matter the owner text in it. But I really, really like elements having specific interactions with other elements. We already have several of those abilities in the game so far, and I'm going to keep doing it. Then you've got, finally, they have their own Titan passive in Tier 3, so their general can be supercharged. And then you've got a Krakatoa, little SpongeBob reference there, where it's really just a finishing ability, because as you'll see, the very last text on this ability is, following this action, each volcano used becomes a mountain, and, you know, that's kind of Magma's entire shtick. So I would imagine you're going to use this ability, you're counting on it being the last attack you ever do. But I do see some definite strategies where I don't see, you know, the ability to actually farm up my 5 volcanoes for my quests. I've got lots of aggro nations on the board. I got to go to war. And so maybe I use Pompeii to get a couple volcanoes, and I use that to get a lot of soldiers, Pyroclastic Vents to defend against aggro attacks, where eventually I can turn on them once they are starved out and my economy has won the day. I've got Drop the Basalt and Krakatoa in order to finish off those aggro opponents that somehow made it to the late game. We also have San Andreas Did It, which gives us another free volcano, but it kind of forces us to go in an aggro direction. And so we're giving Magma a couple different strategies that I think are viable. So in a more turtley matchup, based on all 3 other opponents in the game, you can decide whether or not I'm going to go for a late game volcano 50-50 or 10 army finish. Or you've got Magma turning it on in the mid game, getting a few volcanoes, but farming out those free soldiers so that you can take it to bosses or take it to the enemy. I see that as very, very viable. But the new mechanic in the game that I think is going to put a little more pressure on the middle of the board, and yes, eventually everyone is going to have their own version of this, but you'll notice this little text on this ability, Blood Bank, Monument. Every element will eventually have their own monument, and it all revolves around star tiles. We changed the price of star tiles not too far back to be 5/5. And when you have, forests and deserts and swamps as your star tile closest to you, that's really rough. Because, you're spending a lot of resources on a pretty crappy tile. But now there's relevance to that. And it's going to force more people to the middle of the board because a lot of these elements need to go to the middle of the board to succeed in the new strategy line that we are putting in place for them. And so I'm emphasizing the elements that have kind of fallen to the wayside in the beginnings of the season, which will be blood, nature, sand, and poison for now. Of course, more to come, but those are the elements that haven't been highly sought after by many players, and so we want to give them perhaps a little more attractiveness in terms of what elements you're going to pick. And so what monuments are is they are a building that you can place on an own star tile, and you can still place a barracks or a resource building or defensive fortifications on top of that. Bloods is going to give them a lot of mid-game power because that's where I want Blood to sit. I want them to be weak to aggro, but strong against really turtley nations. And so what this does is Bat Form no longer uses your general's movement, and Exsanguinate has 3 charges. So the concept of the monument is you place a building on your star tile, and as long as you own that tile, that building's effect will remain. The moment that you lose that tile, that monument is lost and all abilities associated with it are gone and you can't get it back. I suppose you could pay for it at the temple, but I don't see too many elements accomplishing that. But what we did is we shifted Blood's altar ability straight to their passive. So now tier 2, you may place an altar tile on one of your own tiles, because Blood actually has several relevant abilities that you need to weigh, deciding on whether or not you're going to go for it. And so altar being a part of their passive, I think is pretty necessary. I think it's pretty fitting and a very healthy shift for them in terms of their overall strategy. Because most players, you can't afford to sacrifice all your soldiers at the altar while also balancing not losing all of your land that you worked really hard to get in the game. So the other monuments that are going into the game right away are Nature's, Sands, and Poisons. Nature's, I really like this, as bosses have become so instrumental to many people's strategies. For 10 BM, place a building on an own star tile that prevents enemy nations from attacking boss tiles. You can attack them. Others can't until this tile is lost. So this is going to force opponents to come into your direction, yes, and attack that star tile, but if you buy yourself 1 or 2 turns, maybe you can pounce upon a boss that your opponent was eyeing. Then you've got social distancing. I'll save Sand for last. Oops, I didn't change the name. Oops. This name will be changed whenever it goes in here in just a second. For 10 PM, place a building on an own star tile with the following effects. While it is standing, immediately recycle Man-Made Plague. But what the subtext of your quest for Poison, Plague did not count for your quest. But if this building is standing, it will count for your quest, which gives Poison's quest a whole lot more relevance. But the reason why I think this is totally healthy is because you have to build this in tier 2, presumably, unless you've got 40 BM. You could go tier 3 and immediately do it and then get your ability back, right? But what I see this optimally being used as is you're using it in tier 2, which buys you at least 1 more turn for your opponent to go tier 3, and potentially give your opponents opportunity to stop them from optimally utilizing this monument, and therefore getting their quest in one fell swoop. Now, that being said, the Plague is not going to, it doesn't necessarily have to get you really far into your quest. If everyone at the table is rolling a 1 or a 2, then you really haven't made that much progress, and yet it still gives them a pretty good chance of completing that quest, a much more significant chance. Then we've got the Great Sphinx, and I've got a little bit of an issue with this right now, but I do think it will be viable in a lot of circumstances. Sand is S tier with 2 deserts in their corner, and really just B or C tier when there's only 1 desert in the corner, maybe even D tier. And so the Great Sphinx, it does cost a little bit more than the other monuments currently in play, but it converts all non-landmark, non-boss tiles adjacent to it into deserts, which gives you a greater chance of hitting that very, very coveted 5 desert mark for Sand, even if there's only 1 desert in the corner. But what it also does is it gives you access to that tier 3 move through deserts at no movement cost right away, as long as you hold that building. And so that's the reason for the increased price, because the argument is, well, if I'm at 15 BM, why don't I just wait for 20 and go to tier 3 anyway? Well, now what I can do is if I spend this BM, I still have food left over to purchase armies to really just secure my borders and go for it that way. In fact, I think this card, I don't think it'll be weak. I think it may be too strong. So we'll have to see in the coming games. We'll have to see if it's attractive to newer players. You guys are the testers, of course. Then we've got 12 new weather events. Pretty fun, pretty fun. Hold on. Let's make sure we can see everything on this screen here. Ta-da. Wanted to slow down the game just a little bit, and once again, there's like 80 weather events currently in the game. We're adding 10 or 12 more. So, it's not a high chance that, many of these are featured in every single game, but I wanted to give more map manipulation, and also many of these slow down the pace of the game, which is pretty cool. Sudden Chill and Sweater Weather are going to integrate blizzards as really good border lines between the long sides of the board, because it goes in that tile that goes right in between the landmark and the boss tile on either side. You got a western choice or an eastern choice here. But as we have a heavy emphasis on star tiles, Manifest Destiny, star tiles cost 1 food and 1 BM this turn. I think that's really cool. Imagine that happens on turn 2 or turn 3, and suddenly everything becomes possible for a lot of elements that it might have been very difficult for them to economically achieve that without this weather event. So I think that's really, really cool. And then we have mirrored effects where we had the blizzards being integrated. We also have volcanoes being integrated. This is going to be both good for fire and magma. And then as I love the relics. Relics are a personal favorite of mine. Even if the smith is not on the board, there's a weather event that allows you to buy relics for 1 turn and for half price, which is pretty cool. Most of those relics, of course, cost 10 BM, so getting a really, really powerful ability or effect for 5 BM is really awesome. Or maybe you can spring for the Dragon's Lair at 10 BM. Pretty powerful. On top of that, we've got 6 more at your disposal. PvP, never heard of it. All unknown star tiles become all unowned star tiles become boss tiles. Units currently residing on these tiles are eliminated to once again emphasize that star tile in the middle. Because also there's merits to not owning your star tile and hoping that this weather event happens and you get a boss to help achieve a win condition. Then we've got a weather event that finally initiates the Aether event at the center of the board. And then we've got lots of different recycle components in the forms of tier ups, elemental conversions, and elements provide. So this will allow everyone to regain access to one ability that's been used this game. So you might want to at least use one ability on turn 1, who knows. And then the elements provide is essentially that elemental devotion advantage card, but for everyone on 1 turn. And so it does make a lot of these later game nations achieve their strategies on a more optimal timeline when you're competing with the likes of Lightning and Fire, who are just zerging you down from the very start. I also like abilities like Mount Up. This gives more emphasis on the earlier turn players, because we've seen a few weeks ago, it was really a 25% chance for each turn to win the game. But now it's starting to turn 3 and turn 4. They are really dominating the games. And this isn't only the season matches. These are the casual games outside. Turn 3 and turn 4 are starting to win a lot more. I think they're at like 33% win rate, whereas turn 1 and turn 2 players, are dropping accordingly. And so this allows, earlier turn players to initiate some aggressive plays before the other players even have a chance to do so. And then, of course, got to throw in another Star Wars meme there for you, too. We also have a couple of bosses coming into play here. All of these will be added to the notebook for you guys to peruse whenever the next time you load this Steam file is. These will all be integrated into the game along with all the new abilities and monuments, and I hope you enjoy it. And I hope these matches are hot, hot, hot! See you next time.